Hello, good evening. Dave, you got me on there? Yes. Good evening to y'all. Glad you're here. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 17 and 18 tonight. Welcome to everybody else on this dreary, rainy day. But it's nice to have a few drops out there. Everybody all right? Yeah. Okay. Just checking. Just making sure. Glad y'all are here. All right. Let's get into it because we got a lot to talk about tonight. Father, you're good. Thanks for just a chance to be in your word. Thanks for the opportunity to hear from you, to learn from you, to see you carrying out some cool stuff, how you work with people, and may we learn some deep things even about our own lives and our own walk. And may you be honored and glorified in the way that we think, in the way that we talk tonight, in the way that we hear things, the way we just communicate as a family. We love you. We ask that you continue to move our hearts in your direction and continue to grant us wisdom and understanding. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Chapter 17, Water from the Rock. Hey. How are you guys? Ed, will you grab 2 sets of notes, please, for me? And Dylan and Mandy up here. Pretty please. All right, so chapter 17, we're going to start with the first 7 verses. And as always, if you're new, feel free at any point in time while I'm either reading or going over the notes, feel free to share or comment or not. Either way, I'm going to do a lot of talking. So if you don't want to hear me talking, you better speak up. Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin, which I think is hilarious, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped in Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people contended with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." So Moses said to them, "Why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord?" The people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why is it you have brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Which I thought was very interesting that it says livestock, because remember last week we talked about if there was no food, maybe they ate through their livestock, but obviously they did not because they still have livestock here. So Moses cried out to the Lord saying, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." And the Lord said to Moses, "Go on before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it that the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the contention of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" So we have the continuation of this journey. Remember last week we talked about them getting these honeycomb flakes, these little flakes of honey flavored whatever. Every day for 40 years they had it, except on the Sabbaths, on the 7th day. And they had some quail. Maybe it was continual. We know for sure it was on that one day. But God continued to sustain them and give them exactly what they needed, even though it wasn't quite what they wanted. But now they're continuing on this journey as God's commanded them to continue move towards the promised land. And they are leaving out of the wilderness of sin. Not that they were sinning, it's just that's what it was called. And so as they're walking through the wilderness, naturally they become thirsty. And remember, they just left a little oasis with the 12 watering holes and these big palm trees that gave them some shade. But now they've left it. They've moved on. But now they're complaining again, as they always do. And so they say, "We are thirsty. Give us something to drink." But I want us to focus just for a moment on this wilderness of sin, or wilderness named sin. Isn't it interesting, first off, that it was called sin, the wilderness of sin, and nothing in that wilderness was satisfying them? They're heading in a direction, the promised land that God has promised them, and they are in this vastness of this journey, and they're wanting water, but there was none. They say, we're thirsty. Give us what we want, what we need to sustain us. So they know that they're missing something, and they know that it is water. And then they go to Moses saying, hey, you've got to fix this. We need this. And yet, isn't it interesting that Moses cannot provide them what they are looking for? Just like we go to people and things to provide for us all of that time that they cannot. And so before our time in Christ, we are all wandering in a vast wilderness, looking for things to satisfy us. And even after Christ, we still try to find things to satisfy us in this journey as we go toward heaven. So we're always looking for something to satisfy that thirst and hunger within us, and none of it truly satisfies except for what we find in Jesus. So finding Jesus as we're heading toward heaven, we're still looking for those things to satisfy, and nothing will. And just as the people contend with Moses, we argue with other people, with God. But isn't it interesting? In just a few moments, I'm just going to jump ahead because it's so much fun. We know that he's going to strike the rock, and the rock is going to bring forth the very thing that they know that they need, which is water. And isn't it fascinating that in our wilderness journey that God struck Christ and the living water poured out to give us exactly what we needed? You can't tell me that the Old Testament is dead and irrelevant. It is so relevant and such a picture of everything that's going to take place coming, and even for our own lives. It is a great picture of what he has done, what he continues to do, and how we can learn from it to apply these things even to our own lives. I just find that super duper fascinating. And so as they're going through this wilderness, they're super thirsty, and they begin to contend with Moses. Now, I wanted to look this up because it could mean a lot of different things. And here are some of the things with the Hebrew word for contention or fighting or quarreling. So some of the things that it talks about is striving with. So there's tension between the people and Moses. There's arguing with Moses, like, you brought us out here. We were fine back in Egypt. At least we had water there. You should have just left us alone to die. They're quarreling and they're complaining against Moses. And again, Moses is just the figurehead. Moses is just the one doing what God has said to him. It's kind of like when we complain against the pastor after the pastor's preached what God has put on his heart, right? You can contend and argue with me all you want. I'm just preaching what his word says. Go fuss at him. Like, he's the one that said it. And so they're fussing. And again, I find it interesting that we at least get an insight as to what is still remaining even after they ran out of food. Their livestock, their children, and themselves are still needing and moving forward. They're still all there. And so Moses goes to the Lord and says, what do you want me to do, man? Like, you put me with these people. You put us out here. We have no water. They need water. I would like some water. They're ready to stone me. Like, do something. You got to fix this. And so his response to Moses is, go ahead. Just move in front of the people. Take off. Go down the little journey a little way. Take some elders with you. Take the rod that you use to separate the waters. Now, I find it interesting that he says that you take the rod that you struck the river with. Well, he didn't strike the river. If we were to go back and look, he just raised his rod. That's what God told him to do, and the river split. So I struggled with that for a brief moment. I'm like, okay, well, is that two different things? Not necessarily. Him raising his rod is essentially him striking at the river, the sea, for it to split. It just sounds different to us, but he's still striking, not in a physical sense, but he's striking to make it open. But I still also find it interesting because later on in the previous chapter, Moses talked about that God did it. I split it open. And yet Moses was commanded to split it open. And so who really split it open? Well, in the people's eyes, they saw Moses do it. Moses raised his rod, water split. Moses did it. But we also know Moses only did it because of the power of the God that he serves. So they both did it, but ultimately God did it. Does that make sense? You accomplish a lot in your life, a lot of things that you never thought that you could do. So you are doing it, and yet you realize that it's God doing it in you and through you. So yes, we accomplish some really cool stuff, but our job, our responsibility is to turn it back to the one that gave us the strength, the know-how, and the courage to actually do what we were able to do. Does that make sense? And so that's kind of what we see here as we read through here. So he says, take your rod and go to this rock in Oreb. He's like, I want you to meet me there. And what I want you to do is I want you to strike the rock. And if you strike the rock, water will come out. That's what he does. And guess what? They have running water. And so again, just want to remind us, in the wilderness, there is nothing which satisfies us except for the living water. Jesus is our rock, struck by God to produce the living water in our wilderness of sin. So Moses obeys, and then he renames the place Massa and Meribah, meaning tempted and contention. And then the people have to say, or he says, this is kind of what they were saying. Is God either for us or against us? Is he with us or is he not? You ever get to that place where everything is coming against you? Everything seems like it's just caving in. And you kind of wonder, okay, God, are you there or are you not? Are you helping me or are you hurting me? If you haven't gotten there, you're probably going to at some point, because it's a reasonable, rational, human question to always think about, what's going on here? I've had plenty of those in my lifetime. Luckily for me, I've chosen to go in the right direction and trust the one that I know knows me best. There are a lot of people that have faced those type of things and chose to just assume God's against them and hates them and walk away. And that's kind of where these people are at. Any thoughts on those first 7 verses? Yes, ma'am. Oh, does he really? Oh, I missed that because I looked back and I missed it. Oh, yeah. To make it blood. That would make sense. Good catch. Thank you. Did everybody catch that? So in Exodus 7 or chapter 7, verse 15, it says that God told Moses, remember in the first plague, to go and strike the Nile, and that's what turned it into blood. And so that's what it's referring to. My mind just went to automatically the Red Sea, but Red Sea is not a river, it's a sea. It's the little details. Got to pay attention. Yeah. So one was 7-iron, one's a pitching wedge, one's a driver. Yeah. It all depended on the size of the show that he needed to put on. Yes, golf club of rods. Any other thoughts?
They're in Saudi Arabia, where they crossed the Canal and made their way up. And there's an actual rock archaeology.
Okay.
It stands better than 50 feet tall.
Oh, for real?
And it is split perfectly down the middle. And the thing that they can't explain, science can't.
Right.
It appears to be, according to them, that it has the looks of water erosion that was rapidly coming out. Now, if anybody that's like a Ron Wyatt type of a Discovery Channel type of thing. So if anybody wants to fact check me.
Sure. So you're saying that there's documentation of showing a rock that looks like it had water flowing out of it at a pretty good clip that's kind of split down the middle, which makes sense. That's kind of how God would probably do it. Like,
is that rock this one or is it the next one that strikes?
It's one of the two, but I know the next is there.
I just don't like. How does that work? How do you have a rock that has water coming out of the middle of it, except the fact that God does it? Like what? Yes, yeah. They probably had it ready, And he just hit that faucet with his 9-iron, and it just knocked it wide open. Yeah. Yeah. For a negative, and this is for a help. That's interesting. Yeah. The fact that the first strike was to bring about a consequence or another sign, just in a negative sense. The second strike was another sign, but more of a positive reward. Yeah. I love to think about these things, like Moses walking up to a rock. All these elders are standing around, and Moses just falls off and smacks this thing. Like, was it instant water out? Was it like a little bit of a fissure crack coming down and then a little bit of trickle, a little bit more? Like, what would it have been like? And what would their reaction been? Because that's not normal. You don't just hit a rock and water comes out. Not that I've ever seen. And I grew up in the mountains and we never did that. So it had to be fascinating. Had to be. And was it ice cold? Like, yeah, no. Well, it wouldn't be good for their stomachs. So, but probably too cold would be brutal. And where'd it go? Did it create a river? Did it get sopped up by the sand? Did it make a big wet spot? Like, I don't know. Fun to think about that, right? Doesn't matter at all. However, it's fun to consider. What was it really like? What did it look like? What did it sound like? What did it smell like? Like, there's all kinds of different options that you could consider. Anyway, any other thoughts? Sorry, I could go on and on and on. Right.
We've done part of the sea. We've done things that the first one. We've done head man.
Yeah.
We've done head oil, and gave them comfortably spot.
Right. Right. Yeah. Did he take a big swat at it, or did he just walk up and tap it? Because he has been a part of all these massive things that God's done. I don't know. We're gonna ask him when we get there. Any other thoughts before we move on? Yes, Ed.
It's interesting that after all they've been through and all the signs they've already seen, that saying, well, is it God or is it accident?
Yes, that's Ed. Seriously, when I read these guys, my heart really does go out for them because they're stuck in the middle of nowhere and they don't know where they're headed. They just know that there's a land somewhere over here that they're heading for. They don't know how they're going to get there, how long it's going to take. So part of me gets it, but part of me is what you just said too, of how soon they forget all these things that God has done. Like, these plagues are no joke. Splitting a sea is no joke. Honeycomb falling from heaven and quail showing up out of that's nothing to sneeze at. And yet, why would they not just say, okay, Moses, God's done some really cool stuff. We're a little thirsty. Would you mind asking him, can we get a little more? But in the way they do it, it's, dude, what are you doing out here? You got us back out here again. Why is God doing this? He hates us. He's against us. He's either for us or he's not. Yeah. But do we not do that? All the time. All the time. All the time. Sir? Yes, stiff-necked. I love that term, stiff-necked. All right, let's keep going. 8 through 14. We'll finish the chapter here, and then we'll jump into 18. Now, Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar and called its name, the Lord is my banner. For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. So Amalek shows back up. Now, if you remember, Amalek was all the way back to Esau. Is one of his original sons. And remember, Esau kind of split off, did his thing. And so this isn't that Amalek, because remember, 400 years have passed waiting for God to show up and retrieve the children of Israel out of Egypt. So a lot of Amaleks have passed, but the Amalekites are there, and they're a powerful little nation. And so they decide, under the rule of Amalek, that they're going to come and attack the children of Israel. So they must have been big enough, because remember, the children of Israel, 2 million plus people, and so they come and attack. Well, Moses says, Joshua, get some guys together and go out and fight. And here's how we're going to fight. You choose your men, you go out, you do your thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go stand on a hill, and I'm going to raise my hands with the rod of God, and as long as my hands are up, you're going to be fine. But when they drop, they won't. Now, I'm sure he didn't tell them that, but he just said, I'm going to be up there watching over you. But he noticed, Moses did, as his hand was up, that they were winning. As long as the rod was up, they were winning. But the moment that he began to lower it, they began to lose. Now, I don't know how you tell that. I've never really watched war like that. But it was apparent. Something changed in the warfare. And so he would quickly put it back up, and they would begin to win again. And as they begin to lower, they begin to lose. Now, we don't know how big this rod is, right? So if you stand there all day, and that's kind of what happens, it's all day long from morning till evening, you're going to get tired. Moses isn't a young buck anymore either. And so he's trying to help these guys out. And so Hur and Aaron are there, and they realize what's going on. And so they bring this big old stone over. He sits down, because obviously his legs are getting tired as well. And they stand there, and they hold his arms up the entirety of the battle. And Israel prevails. I think it's interesting that we probably should consider those type of things when we are going through battles. That we should have somebody in our corner standing on our behalf, entreating the Lord on our behalf, because we need that. That's kind of what church helps us do. It's the purpose of having good God-honoring relationships and friends, and being open and vulnerable about certain things that they can help us work through. That's exactly what's happening here. Moses is doing his thing while Joshua is doing his thing. Aaron and Hur, they do their thing. Notice that it's all different, meaning we can't all do the same thing. Others are gifted with certain gifts, and those are the things that we should leverage to be able to accomplish what God has for us. And so he names this place, he builds an altar to honor God because of what God did, and he named it, the Lord is my banner, because God said, I'm going to continue to whip up on Amalek from here on out. The Amalekites just will not be able to do it. I think it's interesting, too, that he says, write this down and make sure Joshua hears about it. Why? Joshua is going to be the next leader, and he needs to know that this is the first battle that God did, and he needs to be wary of that because it's going to continue. Any thoughts on the rest of chapter 17? Philistines. Philistines were the giants, right? I don't think it was the Amalekites. I think you're right, but I don't think it was the. I'd have to go back and look. And your thoughts?
that this Israel was a slave,
It's okay.
community.
Yes.
Just to
Yes. They weren't warriors. They're a bunch of farmers.
They weren't warriors, so now they're in the desert.
Yeah.
Where are the arms? Where are the tools? Where?
That's a great question, because
There's much information that I will say missing or not tell. That will be awesome to find maybe in history or.
Sure. I mean, it's reasonable to assume that they didn't have any kind of armor or sword. It's a good assumption. Could there be something that was taken from the Egyptians when they left? Maybe. But the reality is they're not trained warriors. They are farmers. They are slave owner or workers. Like they're going to be buff, like they're going to be fit, but they're not fighters. And so Joshua has to go through and choose an army to go and fight, unprepared, untrained. Let's go wrestle. I mean, that's basically what it sounds like. Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great thought. Makes you wonder what they really were able to do in that short amount of time. Because it seems like he talks to him that afternoon, says, hey, get an army because tomorrow you're going to battle. Like, you need to get it going. Any other thoughts? Yes, ma'am. As could be. It could be. It could be. As they killed somebody, they took theirs. You know what else I was thinking, Debbie, too? Is because I thought this is where you were going to go. When the waters crashed back in, I'm sure maybe things floated up or were on the edge, and maybe they took a few things to help them along their way. So there could be that they had some type of weaponry to be able to do something. Interesting. They do not float. They don't. But I'm thinking with the crashing of the waters, it could have washed it to the edge, that they could have seen it or snatched it up. Or maybe they went in deep diving in wetsuits and snorkeling. Yeah, went scuba diving to get their stuff. Yeah. So it could have been in the sheath still of the bodies. Yeah. Yeah. Could have been. Could have been. Anak. Thank you. Yeah. Close. Still some A's, N's, and K's in there. Any other thought? Were you raising your hand or scratching your head? Both.
Probably not unheard of that you use slave labor as infantrymen or whatever. May have already had it.
Could have, yeah. It's never mentioned because it's only the brick making, but it very well could have been. You're going to fight for us. Sure. Yeah, Ed.
A couple of things. One, in the not too distant future, God gives certain people with extremely intricate metalworking skills. So if you want them to make swords, you made it happen.
Sure.
So they could have developed some fighting.
Yeah, and that's very true because obviously we know later on they've got the skills to do it. So the knowledge and know-how is in there, and it could have been that some of these guys were slave workers for the forges and the iron workers and whatever. I was thinking too. I know battles are way different than what we see in movies and things like that. When the Amalekites moved in, they've got to take time to set everything up. Right? They're going to encamp somewhere else. And so even though it feels like and seems like this is like a overnight conversation of, hey, go get an army and go fight tomorrow, it very well could be you've got a week to prepare. You've got some time to get your affairs in order to do this battle right. I mean, I'm not a general, so I don't know how they did it, but that would be my assumption, that there's some time that's passing in this. And plus, I mean, Moses has got to get up to the hill before the battle starts. So that's going to take a little bit. especially if he's older. Take,
When David, before David healed the giant, like 40 days or so.
That's true.
Past the army just in front of him.
That's true. They sat there for a long time, just kind of jabbing back and forth. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Until David said, my turn. Any other thoughts? And no, that was a knock on old people. You know what I was thinking though? Because I was thinking if it were me, it'd take me all day to get up that hill. It'd take me a while. I saw you over, Chuck. I got my own. And
One thing that really jumped out to me was how the children of Amalek came out to fight, which was not uncommon, kind of, like in David's time. This is the time of the year everybody's been out
Right.
fighting to see who's the toughest.
sure.
And how many guys, probably more than ladies, have seen the movie Tombstone,
Oh, yeah.
where Doc Holliday goes up against Johnny Ringo, and Johnny Ringo's like, I just pulled it out. And he said, I wasn't.
Yep.
And that's how I think of this, God's like, bad idea. And they're like, oh, no, it's nothing. He's like, oh, but it is.
Yeah. You stepped up, so I'm going to call your bluff.
I'm going to persecute you and wipe you out because of one bad choice against
Yes.
bad idea.
That's good. That's good. It's one of my favorite movies, by the way. Oh, I had a thought too, and I forgot it already. Anyway, any other thoughts? Thanks, Chuck. Yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, sir. You got to get away up there, buddy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Observation that the Lord said he's going to wipe out the name of the Amalekites.
Mm-hmm.
Then he tells them to write it down on the scroll.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I found that interesting. Like, why is he saying I'm going to wipe them out? But then it talks about how he's going to basically persecute them the rest of their days. Or maybe never give them a spot to really be who they are. They're still there, but never like established. And one of the things I was thinking too while it was talking, I think this is what it was, Ed. Came back to me, Chuck. What do the Amalekites have to gain in this? Except that they may get stuff and people, but there's no land, there's no territory. They're wandering in the wilderness, but the Amalekites are like, we're going to go whip them. So could it be because they're Esau's descendants that they just don't like the children of Israel, period? But would they even know who the children of Israel are in the sense that we know them? Or is it just some other group of people that they're just going to go out and wipe out? We got nothing else better to do. It's a season of war. We found a group of weak people. Let's go take them out. The Amalekites, I would think they had a territory somewhere. Could be. It could be. If they feel this big group's coming, they're going to be a little preemptive strike. Sure, could be. Any other thought? Yes.
So you said the children of Israel or Amalek know that is Satan knows.
Yep.
He was the one moving this. Like, it wouldn't matter to him whether they had. He wants to kill less people because that's what the size.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. He could have easily just put it in their heart to go wipe them out. All right, we good? That's chapter 17. Shall we hit 18? This is a good one. First 12 verses, here we go. And Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back, with her two sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, where he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And the name of the other was Eliezer, where he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. That's a big meaning for a name. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Now he had said to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down, kissed him, and they asked each other about their well-being, and they went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which the Lord had done for Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. So Moses gets word that his father-in-law is coming to town. For some of you, that would panic you. For Moses, it did not. His father-in-law, if you'll remember in Exodus 2:16, was a priest in Midian. His name is Jethro. And Jethro hears about this mass transit of people coming across the way, and they hear how it had happened and what God had done. And Jethro realizes that the people are safe now, so we can go to Moses. But he brings Moses' wife and his sons back to him. Now, here's what's interesting. I couldn't find anywhere, maybe Debbie can, but I couldn't find anywhere that he had sent them off. It gets close in chapter 4, but it never says that he sends them away at any time. So at some point in time in all of these plagues and all the things that's taken place, maybe before the Exodus, maybe before the plagues, he has sent Zipporah and the kids back to her dad for her safekeeping. Because obviously at some point she left. Maybe she's like, I'm out. I don't want no part of this. But Jethro says it's time to go back. Maybe he's tired of the kids. Maybe he's tired of the grandkids and wants them out of the house. Maybe he just wants to reunite Moses with his family. Either way, that's what takes place. And so they come to the encampment, and it's the mountain of God. They sent a message that he was bringing his family back, and I can imagine how excited Moses had to have been. But what's interesting is, Scripture tells us, Moses writes and shows us that as soon as Jethro and all the family shows up, he greets Jethro with a kiss and they talk. Now listen, if I had a choice between kissing my father-in-law or greeting my wife with a kiss, Malcolm's losing out. I'm going to kiss Sally. I'm going to kiss my kids. I'm going to talk to them first. I'm going to reunite with them, and then I'll catch up with Malcolm later. That's my father-in-law. I love Malcolm, but I love his daughter a lot more than I love Malcolm. Like, I would want to see my family, but it's really interesting. They exchange some pleasantries, and then they go into the tent, and Moses just explains everything that God has done. Now, Jethro may have heard some things here and there, but could you imagine the excitement that a priest who believed in God would have as he's listening to these fascinating tales and stories and testimonies of what God has done for the children of Israel as they were in Egypt and as they came out of Egypt, and what God did through the plagues and through the manna and through the splitting of the Red Sea? Could you imagine what would the chatter in that tent was going on? I get excited when I hear what God is doing in your life. And I hope that you get excited when you hear what God is doing in someone else's life. This is monumental stuff. This is earth-shattering, like altar-building type maneuvers that God is doing that should put chills on our arms and backs when we read about this stuff. And to be in person with the guy that saw it. This is the rod, Jethro. Look at the manna. This is the jar of manna that we've been eating. Like, the excitement had to be just crazy amazing. And so he just shares all of these. And Jethro does what any good Pentecostal would do. He just starts praising God. He just is overjoyed and overtaken by excitement and appreciation for the goodness and greatness of God. And so what does he do? He blesses God's name. And then he just talks about the reminder of how good God is. And he sacrifices to God as a thank you for what he has done. And as he's doing this, the elders come, Aaron comes, and they just share some bread together, a meal. Any thoughts on those first 12 verses? Yes, sir. Yeah, so that's chapter 4. That's kind of where I think it was too. Because in that moment is when he heads into Egypt and we don't really hear about her anymore. So it's got to be somewhere in there like, this dude's serious. Like, we're going to let you do your thing. We'll catch up later. Like, what Moses was getting ready to do was huge. And maybe Moses didn't want her to be there. Maybe he was trying to protect his family. I don't know. And we don't really know how old the boys are. Maybe it was the flies or the frogs. Who knows? Any other thoughts? Anybody intrigued as to why there's no mention of the reuniting of Moses with his wife and kids? Like, we don't see that anywhere. It's not mentioned at all, except the fact that they came with Jethro. But like, why? Well, what if, again, this isn't about Moses or Jethro or Zipporah. It's about the goodness of God and the power of what he's able to do. It's not that that's not important. It's not that it didn't happen. What's important is the testimony of God was given to Jethro, and Jethro is blown away by it and honors God with sacrifices and praises. That is what is important. It doesn't mean Zipporah means nothing to Moses or his kids mean nothing, because it's his family. But what is most important? In fact, Jesus talks about, if you can't hate your father or your mother and love me more, then you really can't be my follower. I'm not sure how much plainer that can be. I mean, we have to hate them? No, but we've got to love God more than anything else. And so in this instance, as excited as he may have been to see his wife and kids, he's most excited to share what God has been doing. Maybe they're sitting there. Could you imagine the boys if they were sitting there, a little older, but they're wide-eyed, listening to their dad talk about this huge walls of water, seeing the fish or seeing whatever, and these chariots coming at them. Like, I can't even imagine the description that he's given in this tent and what they're just picturing in their minds. It had to be spectacular. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
So here's the Israelite that came into the land. His daughter was an Israelite, Bethlehem or
Yeah.
Arab or-
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so he was a priest of God as well.
Sure.
And so now it's like one of the earliest cases of evangelizing. And so it's like you're an Israelite now, talking to a person that's essentially pagan,
Yep.
Gentile. And now it's like, now they believe God, so now it's like, salvation is coming to your house.
Sure.
You're believing in it, and it's like that's what helps sprout everything.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because obviously the Midianites are a little bit different than the Israelites. So there's got to be some type of different religious flair there, but enough for Jethro to know that there is a God out there of some form, fashion, in a big way. But now obviously he knows, because he's offering a sacrifice to God and giving praises to him. So yeah, he's got to be just blown away by, this is my son-in-law, and look what God is doing through him. This is spectacular. Because he could have said, dude, come on. Splitting the sea, really? Like manna falling from heaven, really? But he can't. The testimony is real. It's true.
There must be a relief, if I can use that word, to have a respectful figure to talk about all this. I mean, Jethro is not anybody.
Sure.
He's a respectful figure in his country and now for him.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity for Moses. to gain the respect of his father-in-law even more than he already had, and to talk about God the way that he did. That's big. Anybody else? Hi. Is this another correction? No. I love those. Yeah.
So his personal life is important.
Right.
And so it is not included.
Sure.
This is so that
The details of that. Sure.
the Israelites down in the ages would know what God had done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Because it is such a historical, here's where we came from. But it's important for us to know why Jethro came. Well, it was to bring the wife and kids back. All you need to know. That's good. That's good. Okay, let's keep going. A couple of verses here. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit, and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws." So father-in-law goes to work with Moses the next day, because Moses goes in every day to the office, and he sits and he has a line out the door of people who just need some direction and help or prayer. So Moses sits there from morning until evening and just entertains each person. Over 2 million people coming in saying, "Hey, we got this issue. Can you help us with this?" And Moses says, "Well, here's a statute. Here's a law. Here's what God would say. Here's what we need to do. Do this." Or, "Hey, let me pray for you. Let's pray this way." Nonstop, one after the other, after the other. I can tell you that is exhausting. It is exhausting. And he is carrying the entire load of this 2 million plus people, trying to keep everybody on track. And Jethro's like, "Moses, what are you doing? This is not sustainable. You can't do this." Moses is like, "What? This is the position God has put me in. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm helping the people to do life." So Moses' father-in-law in verse 17 said to him, "The thing that you do is not good." And what I would suggest is, it's not what he's doing that is good. What he's doing is he's directing them to live life worthy of the calling of God, right? So that's good, but how he is doing it, that's really what Jethro is getting at here. How you're accomplishing this is not really good. It's not sustainable. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. Moses, you're going to mentally lose it at some point, and these people are going to get tired of waiting in line and always coming to you when they already know what you're going to say. "For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. Listen now to my voice. I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for the people, so that you may bring the difficulties to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and the laws, and show them the way in which they must walk and the work they must do. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And then let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter by themselves, or they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all this people will also go to their place in peace." So Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. So they judged the people at all times. The hard cases they brought to Moses, but they judged every small case themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way to his own land. So the father-in-law, as all good father-in-laws do, "Hey, I got a suggestion for you." Had a few of those in my lifetime. And he says, here's what I think would be best for you. And this is something that you can take to God and talk to him about, but I really feel like if you'll listen to me, God will honor you in this. He's like, you can't keep doing this. This is not sustainable. It's going to wear you out. It's going to ruin the what you've got going here. So here's what you should do. Let's get everybody together and teach them the law and the statutes all together so everybody knows what's going on. And the really big issues, the things that really need to go before God, that's what you should do. You handle that. But let's get everybody on the same page. And then I want you to choose men that are able to walk with you. And he gives a list. He says, I want them to be able, which is kind of the work ethic. They need to be able to be good stewards of their time and be able to really listen well and give good counsel. They need to fear God. They got to have a faith and trust in the God that we serve. They got to know truth. They got to be honest. They got to be willing to look at the person and tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. They've got to also be able to hear and discern what's going on. And then it says they've got to hate covetousness. Kind of a weird thing, right? Not really. Because people in power get sucked in to wanting more than what's theirs. And so he needs to find people that aren't interested in leveraging their power to get something for themselves. Hey, I'll tell you what you need to hear, what you want to hear, so you can get what you want, but you're going to owe me. So he says, that's not the kind of people we're working or looking at. And so I want you to teach everybody, and I also want you to show them what it looks like to live this out, model it for them, teach them how to work and show them how to walk. And so that's what he does. He gravitates to some men and he takes them and he trains them and he says, you're going to be over this 1,000 group of people. And he's got a bunch of rulers over thousands of groups of thousands. And then he has some rulers over groups of hundreds and in groups of 50s and then some smaller ones. It sounds a little bit like our justice system, does it not? And he says, here's what we're going to do. Each one of these guys can take these smaller issues, and anything that's bigger than what they can handle, they'll bring it to you. And that's what Moses did, and everybody lived in peace for a little while. Interesting setup. Interesting that it comes from somebody that's on the outside but has wisdom about really how to work with people, and God uses him and leverages his wisdom and his counsel to actually create a system to where Moses can really lead this 2 million plus group of people well and effectively. Any thoughts? Could you imagine if I tried to run this church on my own without Tim and Willie and Debbie? And that really, Debbie could run the church all by herself.
It's pretty cool that, Jethro comes all that way, hears Moses describe everything, and he draws the conclusion, God did it. I'm going to bless God, and God used him to then set up what we
Yeah.
pretty much the judicial system for the whole, and the way that.
In theory, yes, for sure. But yeah, I mean, from the beginning of time, God set this out through Jethro. Yeah. And it is neat that it's an outside guy. But it's an outside guy that recognizes the greatness of God. And because of that, God leverages his wisdom and counsel. Yeah, that's cool. Yes, ma'am. Very much so. It's always good to have an outside set of ears and eyes that see things clearly, that come at it without that attitude of covetousness. What can I get? But no, I want what's best for you. And so I'm going to tell you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear. Yeah. Yeah. We all need that. Yes.
Okay. Verse 23 says, if you do this, and God so
Mm-hmm.
but never did it anywhere say that God said do this.
Sure.
It just said Jethro told him.
So it's an implied thing that Moses is following God. And because of the way that Jethro praised the Lord, it is safe to assume that he has a relationship with God enough to where he's using this wisdom and counsel to push Moses in that direction. Because it doesn't say that Moses entreated God and said, okay, here's what my father-in-law said. Should I do this? it's implied that he would have done that to make sure that this is where he needed to go. And we can safely assume that he did do that because he performs what Jethro suggests, and it works. It works well. Yes, sir.
With 2 million people, you divvy them up in groups of 1,000. You have 2,000 of those leaders.
Yeah.
Now divvy them up by 100. And we have a lot of people involved in that.
Yes, sir.
They all get trained.
That's a lot.
It's a long time.
So I was curious. I wonder if each one was like a ranking system, like our judicial. So like, okay, we can't handle it in this group, so let's move to the next smaller group. Let's try to figure it out here. Well, nope, we got to go here. We got to go here. Oh, you know what? This is so big. We just got to go see Moses.
Conversely, if you selected the first 2,000, they then in turn would select people.
The next one's under them. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
You only had to deal with 2,000.
That's all. I'll pass. 400's enough for me. I'm good. Did it float away? Okay. Let me know when you remember it. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
Just like starting like, hi, I'm Jethro. Here's my daughter. Oh, by the way, here's your wife and my daughter back to the kids.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, you might want to do this, and I'm writing off something.
Yeah. See you. Good luck. I'm out. Yeah. Well, what's funny is Moses let him go. Jethro didn't really ask. It's almost like Moses said, okay, now you can go. Now you started this mess, so you're going to have to help me do this. And maybe that's what he did. Maybe he finally got to a place where he was comfortable with it and said, okay, Jethro, thank you. You've got me started, or you've seen it through. See you later. Like, we don't know how long he stays here. But yeah, it very well could be that he stayed around and helped and then rolled out. Yeah, sure. Yeah, to give more guidance and to help him out to understand it. Yeah. Okay, so we've got, yes, sir. You remember it? Good.
When you look at it, Moses was spending all day judging the people.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
I think God said Jethro, and they're gone. I don't believe that Moses called.
Sure. No. Right. Yeah.
God said Jethro moved and Moses needed something.
Yeah. It very well could be, because it's more of a transactional relationship between God and Moses at this point. Hey, God, I need this. Hey, God, can you do this? Can you help here? Rather than, God, will you fill me? Let me worship you for a while. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're saying it's repetitive? It kind of keeps happening? All right. So just a reminder, we've got about 2 or 3 weeks in October that will be in here. The very last week will be our Fall Fest out here. We would love for you to be here to decorate a trunk to hand out candy. The week before that is our annual church administration business meeting that is in and out in an hour. It's just to go over the budget and to let you know kind of some things that are going on and what we've been able to accomplish this year and where we're headed next year. And so the weeks prior to that, we'll have dinners and meeting in here. And then we'll have November and then Christmas. Can you believe it? It's crazy. It's just around the corner. Just so you know, this coming Sunday is the last Faith and the Ballot that's been happening at Lifehouse. They've had 2 other ones that you can go on to DelawareFamilies.org and see them. They've been recorded. But it happens at 6:30. And if you're interested in going to that, you got to register. I'm sorry, it starts at 6. But if you're interested in that, you got to go register just to let them know that you're coming. Again, not trying to push politics, but politics is a necessary evil that we got to be a part of, and we've got to express our voice at some point, somehow, some way. This is the easiest, fastest way to do it. So if you're not registered to vote, you've got a couple more weeks before it'll be too late. Again, not trying to tell you what to do, but we have a responsibility as believers to make our voice known. And so otherwise, we need to stop complaining that it's not going the way we want. So Your only shot is to get out there and vote. Whether you think it's going to go your way or not, doesn't matter. Do your responsible thing as a believer. So I'll just leave that there. And there is an election sermon coming, just so you know. But I'm not telling you when, because I want you to come to church. And we're locking the doors once I start preaching, so you can't leave. All right, let's pray. God, you're so good. Thanks for just a chance to spend time with my friends and family. And Lord, I love their sense of humor. I love to listen to their thoughts and to watch them think through this stuff. And Lord, teaching us how to allow your story to come alive in our mind, not to be carried away by the details, but to not overlook the details, because you are in the details. And there's so much going on in these stories that sometimes we just glaze over them and we don't think about it, or continue to gravitate our heart toward you and wanting to know you more. Open our ears, our spiritual ears and our spiritual eyes to be able to discern and to hear and to see you at work. We love you. We praise you and thank you for being the great and amazing God that you are. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great night. We'll see you next week. We're going to leave the tables and chairs where they are. Just